You're buckled into your seat, ready for takeoff on a routine flight from Denver to Los Angeles. The cabin is a symphony of hushed conversations and the gentle hum of the aircraft's engines. Suddenly, a sharp, condescending tone cuts through the air. A flight attendant, her face contorted in annoyance, is publicly berating a passenger, a black woman, for simply asking a question about the beverage service. The other passengers exchange uneasy glances. But what no one, least of all the dismissive flight attendant, realizes is that the woman she's shaming holds a badge, a gun, and the authority of the federal government. This isn't just a mid-air misunderstanding. It's a powder keg of prejudice about to ignite. Buckle up, because this story of arrogance and instant karma will leave you absolutely stunned. The recycled air of Global American Airlines Flight 1128 hummed with the predictable drone of 1,000 journeys. It was a mundane Tuesday in October, the kind of day that vanishes from memory the moment it's over. The flight, a well-trodden path from Denver to Los Angeles, was filled with a familiar, caste-weary business travelers, families buzzing with Disneyland anticipation, and students returning to school. In seat 14C, an aisle seat, sat Serena Washington. To the casual observer, she was utterly unremarkable, and that was by design. She wore comfortable grey sweatpants, a worn-in Howard University sweatshirt and running shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, neat bun. A pair of oversized non-prescription glasses sat on her nose, and a paperback novel lay open on her lap. She looked like a graduate student, or perhaps a young teacher heading home. She was, in fact, neither. Serena Washington was a federal air marshal, and she was on duty. Her tell wasn't in her appearance, but in her stillness. While others shifted, slept, or stared out the window, Serena's gaze moved with a quiet, deliberate economy. She noted the man in 9B, who seemed overly anxious, his knuckles white on the armrest. She catalogued the group of boisterous young men in the back, likely a bachelor party, and clocked their rising volume. She observed the flight crew, their practiced smiles and efficient movements. This constant low-level assessment was second nature, the silent hum beneath the surface of her calm exterior. The lead flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s named Brenda Jenkins, moved through the cabin with an air of weary authority. Brenda had been flying for 22 years. She'd seen it all, and her patience had worn as thin as the complimentary napkins. She saw passengers not as people, but as a collection of needs and potential problems. Aisle blockers, seat kickers, call button spammers, she had a category for everyone. Her smile, when she used it, didn't reach her eyes, which held a perpetual glint of annoyance. The beverage service began shortly after the plane reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Serena, whose mouth was dry from the cabin pressure, patiently waited for the cart to reach her row. She was a professional who understood procedure. She never used her position for perks. Her goal was to remain invisible, a ghost in the machine, until the moment she was needed. Brenda and a younger, more cheerful flight attendant named Laura were working the cart. Laura handled the port side of the aisle, Brenda the starboard. When the cart finally squeaked to a halt beside row 14, Brenda looked down at Serena, her expression flat. "Drink?" she asked, the single word, clipped and devoid of warmth. Serena offered a small, polite smile. "Yes, please. Could I get a ginger ale?" Brenda's hand was already reaching for the familiar green can. As she popped the top, Serena added, "And if it's not too much trouble, could I get the full can? I get a bit of motion sickness." And it really helps. It was a simple, polite request. But to Brenda Jenkins, it was an inconvenience. It was a deviation from her well-oiled routine of pouring half a can over a full cup of ice. Her lips thinned into a razor-straight line. "We don't typically give out full cans, ma'am," she said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "It's for inventory purposes. Everyone gets the same amount." Serena's smile didn't falter, though she felt a familiar, weary pang. She had dealt with this brand of petty power-tripping her whole life. "I understand," she said, keeping her tone even and respectful. "I'm happy to skip the ice if that helps. The carbonation is really what I need." Brenda let out an audible theatrical sigh. She placed the half-full cup of ginger ale on Serena's tray table with a sharp thack. "This is what we provide," she stated, her voice dripping with condescension. She looked at Serena's sweatshirt, a flicker of disdain in her eyes. "Surely you can manage." The man in the window seat, a businessman named David Chen, looked over with a frown. The woman across the aisle pretended to be engrossed in her magazine, but her ears were burning. A subtle tension had descended upon the middle of the cabin. Serena took a slow breath, her training kicking in. "De-escalate. Do not draw attention. Your primary mission is the safety of this aircraft." She had endured far worse than a rude flight attendant. She could handle this. "Okay, thank you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She took the cup, but Brenda wasn't finished. She saw Serena's quiet compliance not as de-escalation, but as weakness, and it emboldened her. She leaned in conspiratorially, her voice a stage whisper that carried through the cabin. "You know," Brenda said, a saccharine smile plastered on her face, "we made an announcement about the beverage service earlier. Maybe if some people paid attention, instead of being buried in their books, they'd understand how things work on an airplane." The insult was no longer veiled. It was a direct public shaming. Serena's face remained passive, but inside a cold anger began to smoulder. This wasn't just about a can of ginger ale anymore. It was about respect. It was about the casual, reflexive contempt she saw in Brenda's eyes, a contempt Serena knew was reserved for people who looked like her. David Chen in 14A had heard enough. He was a vice president at a software company, a man accustomed to directness. "Excuse me," he said, leaning forward. "She just asked a simple question. There's no need for that tone." Brenda's head whipped around to face him, her eyes blazing. "Sir, I am responsible for this cabin. Please stay out of it." She turned her glare back to Serena. "Is there anything else I can spell out for you?" The challenge hung in the air, thick and ugly. Every passenger within earshot was now acutely aware of the drama unfolding. Serena looked up from her cup, her gaze meeting Brenda's. The oversized glasses did little to hide the sudden hard intensity in her eyes. For the first time, Brenda felt a flicker of uncertainty. The woman in the Howard sweatshirt wasn't cowering. She wasn't getting angry. She was assessing. Serena gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "No," she said, her voice low and controlled. "Everything is perfectly clear." Brenda, mistaking this for submission, gave a triumphant smirk. She pushed the cart forward with a flourish. "Good," she muttered, just loud enough for Serena to hear. "Then we're done here." Serena watched her go, her fingers tightening slightly around her plastic cup. The mission was paramount. Her cover was essential. But Brenda Jenkins had just made a colossal mistake. She had tried to humiliate a passenger, assuming she was just another powerless person of color. She had no idea she had just targeted the most dangerous person on the plane, and in doing so had set in motion a chain of events that would shatter her career and her life. The storm had not passed. It was just beginning to gather. For the next hour, the flight continued with a strained and artificial calm. The passengers in the middle section of the plane exchanged hushed whispers and sympathetic glances toward Serena, who had reopened her book but wasn't turning the pages. Her senses were on high alert, the confrontation having sharpened her awareness to a razor's edge. She was no longer just passively observing. She was actively analyzing. Brenda Jenkins was a liability. Her unprofessionalism, her willingness to create conflict over nothing, marked her as a weak link in the aircraft's security chain. An unstable crew member was a threat multiplier. Brenda, for her part, moved through her duties with a smug swagger. She had asserted her dominance, and in her mind won. She laughed a little too loudly with Laura in the galley, and made a point of ignoring Serena's row entirely when she passed by. The first sign of real trouble came from the back of the plane. The group of young men, fueled by miniature bottles of vodka they'd snuck aboard, had grown from boisterous to belligerent. One of them, a thick-necked man named Kyle, got into a heated argument with a passenger who asked him to lower his voice. Laura, the junior flight attendant, approached them first. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to keep it down. You're disturbing other passengers." Kyle sneered at her. "Relax, sweetheart. We're just having a good time. It's a free country." His friend, egging him on, yelled, "Yeah, tell him, Kyle." The situation was escalating. Brenda, hearing the commotion, marched back. Her approach was not one of de-escalation, but of confrontation. "I'm not going to tell you again," she snapped her hands on her hips. "Sit down and shut up, or the captain will hear about this." This was precisely the wrong tactic. Kyle, his ego bruised, and his judgment clouded by alcohol, stood up, looming over Brenda. "Or what you gonna ground the plane?" "You don't have the guts." He took a step into the aisle, bumping into a passenger's shoulder. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly from tense to fearful. This was no longer a minor disturbance. Serena's entire posture changed. The book was placed silently in the seatback pocket. Her body was coiled ready. This was it. This was the moment the ghost becomes flesh. Her training dictated a clear protocol: observe, assess, and act only when a clear threat to the safety of the flight emerges. A belligerent, physically intimidating passenger met that threshold. Brenda, realizing she was out of her depth, backed away slightly. "I'm warning you, sir. That's a federal offense." "Make me sit down," Kyle challenged, taking another aggressive step forward. That's when Serena moved. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She rose from her seat with a fluid, deliberate grace that was utterly at odds with her casual attire. She moved into the aisle, placing herself between Kyle and the rest of the cabin. Brenda Serena's voice was calm, but it cut through the noise with absolute authority. "Go to the galley. Now." Brenda stared, bewildered. "Who do you think you are?" Kyle laughed. "Yeah, who are you? His mum?" Serena ignored him completely. Her eyes were locked on Brenda. "Laura," she said, her voice still level, "get on the intercom to the cockpit. Use the emergency channel. Tell Captain Miller we have a level 2 security threat, and the Federal Air Marshal is engaging." The words hung in the air, electric and stunning. Federal Air Marshal. Laura's eyes went wide with a mixture of terror and understanding. She immediately turned and scrambled toward the front. David Chen's jaw dropped. The passengers who had witnessed the earlier humiliation now stared in utter disbelief. Brenda Jenkins froze her face, a mask of pure shock. The blood drained from her face, replaced by a ghastly pale white. The woman she had belittled, the woman she had publicly shamed over a can of soda, was an armed federal agent. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Kyle, however, was too drunk to process the gravity of the situation. "Federal Air, what you're crazy, lady." He made the foolish mistake of reaching out to shove Serena aside. He never saw it coming. In a movement too fast to follow, Serena sidestepped his clumsy push, grabbed his outstretched arm, and used his own momentum against him. With a pivot of her hips and a technique of pure leverage, she twisted his arm behind his back and slammed him face first against the bulkhead wall next to the lavatory. A pained grunt escaped Kyle's lips, as Serena expertly applied a control hold, immobilizing him completely. The entire explosive encounter took less than 2 seconds. She leaned close to his ear, her voice now a blade of ice. "My name is Marshal Serena Washington. You are interfering with a flight crew, which is a federal crime. You will now walk to your seat. You will sit down. You will put your hands on your head, and you will not speak another word for the remainder of this flight. Do you understand me?" The fight went out of Kyle, instantly replaced by the cold, sobering shock of pain and fear. Yes, he wheezed. Serena eased the pressure, slightly maneuvering him back down the aisle and forcing him into his seat. His friend sat in stunned, terrified silence. "Hands on your head," she commanded. Kyle obeyed without hesitation. With the immediate threat neutralized, Serena turned her attention forward. The cabin was deathly quiet. Every eye was on her. She walked calmly toward the front of the plane, her unassuming sweatshirt and sweatpants now seeming like the most brilliant disguise imaginable. She stopped at row 14 and picked up the plastic cup of ginger ale from her tray table. She looked directly at Brenda, who stood as if petrified in the aisle. Brenda's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The condescension, the arrogance, the smug superiority, it had all evaporated, leaving behind a raw, primal fear. Serena held up the cup. For inventory purposes, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Then she walked past Brenda without another glance and disappeared into the galley to speak with the captain, leaving a trail of shattered assumptions and the chilling silence of absolute authority in her wake. The unmasking was complete. The reckoning was about to begin. The hum of the now empty Boeing 737 was a hollow, funereal sound. The adrenaline from the in-flight incident had subsided, leaving behind the cold, stark atmosphere of consequence. For the flight crew and the airline officials who had come aboard the cabin was no longer a vessel of transport, but a crime scene and a hearing room all in one. Brenda Jenkins stood near the galley, wrapped in a bubble of suffocating silence, a pariah in her own workplace. For Serena Washington, the mission was not yet over. Her on-the-ground protocol was as ingrained as her in-flight tactics. After providing her preliminary report to Captain Miller and the shell-shocked director Cynthia Davies, she excused herself. She needed to file her official report while the details were precise and untainted by emotion. In a quiet crew lounge provided by the station manager, she sat down at a sterile desk with her secured government laptop. She initiated a secure connection to the Federal Air Marshal Service network and opened FAM's Incident Report, Form 77B. The form was a landscape of cold bureaucratic boxes: time of incident, threat level assessment, nature of threat, crew response, subject S, details, witness information. To an outsider, it was dry. To Serena, it was a sacred text. Every word she typed would become a permanent, unalterable part of a federal record. She began her fingers moving across the keyboard with methodical precision. Under nature of threat, she detailed Kyle Reed's actions, the intoxication, the verbal abuse, the physical aggression. She described her intervention clinically, using precise terminology for the control hold she'd employed: subscapular grab with wrist lock utilizing subject's forward momentum to achieve bulkhead control. The most difficult section was crew response and contributing factors. Here personal feelings had no place. Her humiliation, her anger, they were irrelevant. All that mattered was the objective assessment of risk. She typed, "Lead flight attendant Brenda Jenkins engaged in unprofessional conduct prior to the primary security event. Passenger Marshal was subjected to public admonishment and condescending language in response to a standard service request. See Addendum A." This behavior established a tense and confrontational atmosphere in the immediate cabin area. During the primary security event, F.A. Jenkins's approach to the belligerent passenger was confrontational rather than de-escalatory, which served to agitate the subject further. When Marshal identified self and issued a lawful order to secure the galley for operational safety, F.A. Jenkins hesitated and verbally questioned the order, creating a critical 1 to 2 second delay in a dynamic threat environment. Her actions demonstrated a lack of situational awareness and an unwillingness to follow established security protocols when issued by an unfamiliar authority figure. This behavior constitutes a potential vulnerability in crew response readiness. She paused, reading it over. It was cold, accurate, and utterly damning. In Addendum A, she recounted the exchange over the ginger ale, quoting Brenda's words verbatim. "Maybe if some people paid attention, and is there anything else I can spell out for you?" The words looked even uglier on the screen than they had sounded in the air. This wasn't revenge. It was a threat assessment, and Brenda Jenkins had failed it spectacularly. After listing David Chen as a key civilian witness and uploading Captain Miller's and Laura Peterson's names as crew witnesses, she encrypted the file and transmitted it. The gears of the federal government had now officially begun to turn. Meanwhile, at Global American's towering headquarters in Chicago, it was late evening. Cynthia Davies's initial frantic report from LAX had already triggered a series of emergency conference calls that reached the highest levels of the company. In a virtual war room, Cynthia, now back in her hotel, was on screen with Catherine Riley, the airline's sharpest legal mind, from Sterling, Hewitt and Finch, and a harried-looking Vice President of Public Relations named Thomas Egan. "Let me be perfectly clear," Catherine Riley said, her voice cutting through the corporate jargon. "This is not an HR issue. This is a 5-alarm legal and regulatory crisis. The moment Marshal Washington filed her 77B, we were put on notice. The TSA and the FAA will be crawling all over us. They will want reports, interviews, and a comprehensive review of our training protocols." Thomas Egan, the PR head, looked pale. "The narrative is poison. Senior flight attendant racially profiles a black passenger who turns out to be a federal air marshal. It's a Hollywood movie script. If this leaks, we won't just be issuing an apology. We'll be the national symbol of corporate bigotry. Our stock will dive, and we'll be fighting off boycotts." "So what's the play?" Cynthia asked, her face grim. "Total and complete excision," Catherine stated flatly. "We investigate this internally faster and more thoroughly than the feds can. We find every piece of supporting evidence for the Marshal's claim, and we sever the source of the problem, Brenda Jenkins, so decisively that there is no question about the company's stance. We need to be able to tell the TSA, we identified the problem and removed it before you even had to ask. This is about containment." "I want her entire file," Cynthia commanded. "Every incident report, every peer, review every captain's note from the last 22 years. I want to know if this was a breakdown or a pattern. I suspect it's the latter." The investigation machine of Global American, usually a slow and bureaucratic beast, roared to life with terrifying efficiency. Within 24 hours, a thick digital file on Brenda Jenkins landed in the inboxes of the crisis team. It painted a grim picture. While no single complaint had ever been serious enough for termination, the accumulated weight of the evidence was staggering. There were a dozen minor passenger complaints about her rude and dismissive attitude. There were 3 separate captain's logs from the last 5 years, noting her rigidity and tendency to create friction. Her peer reviews were a masterclass in coded language. Brenda is very process-oriented. One read a euphemism for her inflexibility. Brenda prefers to do things by the book, said another, hinting at her lack of empathy. The investigative team, led by a calm, methodical ex-FBI agent named Frank Miller, conducted their interviews. Laura Peterson, the junior flight attendant, broke down in tears during her video call. "I knew it was wrong," she confessed, her voice trembling. The way she spoke to that woman, it was so demeaning. "But Brenda, she's senior. She can make your life miserable." I was scared to say anything. Then when the Marshal took control, it was like watching a different reality. Brenda just froze. She was a liability. "I'm so ashamed I didn't speak up earlier." Frank Miller patiently reassured her, making a note. "Clear pattern of intimidation by Jenkins against junior crew." Next, they called David Chen. The software VP was articulate and furious. "I don't need to be coached," he told the airline lawyer on the phone. "I will provide a sworn statement. Your employee, Ms. Jenkins, acted with what I can only describe as malice. It was a clear abuse of her authority. Marshal Washington was a model of restraint. Frankly, your company owes her a debt of gratitude and an apology, a very public one." His written statement, which arrived an hour later, was so detailed and damning it could have been a prosecutor's opening argument. The final piece of the puzzle was the most damning. An investigator cross-referencing service logs found it on that very flight, just 10 minutes before the incident with Serena Brenda's service terminal, showed she had comped a double serving of premium whiskey for a passenger in first class, a platinum-level frequent flyer. The reason she'd entered into the system: service recovery passenger discretion. Her ironclad adherence to policy was, it turned out, entirely selective. 2 weeks after the flight from hell, Brenda Jenkins was summoned to a sterile conference room at an airport hotel near Chicago's O'Hare. She still clung to a sliver of hope, fueled by denial. She believed her 22 years of service and her union would shield her. She walked in with her union representative Bill, a man who had seen hundreds of these hearings, and immediately knew this one was different. The air was thick with finality. Across the long, polished table sat Cynthia Davies, her face a mask of cold corporate fury, and the legal shark Catherine Riley, whose file was twice as thick as Bill's. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Jenkins," Catherine began, forgoing any pleasantries. "We are here to discuss the conclusion of our internal investigation into the events on Flight 1128. Bill cleared his throat. "My client wishes to state that this was a deeply regrettable misunderstanding in a high-stress environment." "The stress, Bill," Catherine cut in her eyes, locking with his, "was created by your client. Let's not waste time. Ms. Jenkins, we have your entire service record. We have sworn statements from your entire crew. We have a statement from passenger David Chen in Fossoyone. And we have the official report filed by a federal air marshal. The narrative is not in dispute." She slid a document across the table. It was a transcript of Laura Peterson's interview. As Brenda's eyes scanned the words, the blood drained from her face. Then came David Chen's statement. Then the service log showing the comped whiskey. It was an avalanche of evidence. "Ms. Jenkins." Catherine's voice was relentless. "Did you or did you not shame a passenger for asking for a full can of soda after granting a discretionary perk to another, more privileged-seeming passenger moments before?" "That's not— I don't—" Brenda stammered, looking at Bill for help, but he could only stare grimly at the table. "Did you or did you not escalate a situation with an intoxicated passenger using confrontation instead of de-escalation contrary to your training?" "He was being aggressive," Brenda pleaded. "And did you or did you not hesitate and question a lawful order from a federal officer during a security incident endangering yourself and your crew?" This was the kill shot. There was no defense. It was a catastrophic failure of her most fundamental duty. Brenda looked at Cynthia Davies, the woman who had promoted her 6 years earlier. Her eyes begged for mercy, for a memory of her 2 decades of loyalty. Cynthia, please. 22 years. It was one bad day. Cynthia Davies finally spoke, her voice devoid of any warmth or sentiment. It wasn't one bad day, Brenda. This file shows it was 1,000 bad moments that you got away with. This time you did it to the wrong person, and you put this entire airline at risk. Your actions were not just unprofessional. They were a disgrace to the uniform. Effective immediately, your employment with Global American Airlines is terminated. For cause. The words hung in the sterile air. Terminated. For cause. The 2 most brutal words in corporate parlance. It meant no severance, no retirement payout, no flight benefits. For life. Brenda stared blankly, her mind refusing to process it. 22 years of her identity, of looking down on the world from 35,000 feet, had just been erased in a hotel conference room. She was no longer a flight attendant. She was just a woman who had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. Her union rep gently touched her arm to lead her out of the room, but she didn't move. She was already a ghost left behind by a company that was now frantically trying to save itself from the consequences of her arrogance. The formal reckoning was complete. The personal one was just beginning. The termination of Brenda Jenkins was intended by Global American Airlines to be a swift surgical amputation to save the whole. Catherine Riley and her legal team had hoped the decisive action would cauterize the wound before it became septic. But in the hyper-connected digital age, secrets have a shelf life measured in hours, not days. The story of Flight 1128 was simply too compelling, too perfectly constructed for drama to remain contained within corporate servers. The leak started, as it so often does, not as a flood, but as a trickle. A junior analyst on Thomas Egan's PR team, terrified of being on the receiving end of the inevitable fallout, decided to get ahead of the story. He fed a carefully curated anonymous tip to a popular, notoriously gossipy travel blog called The Winged Wanderer. The post went live on a Friday afternoon. Exclusive Global American fires senior flight attendant after onboard showdown with undercover Federal Air Marshal. The blog post was a masterwork of viral catnip. It detailed the shaming of a demure passenger in a college sweatshirt, the shocking reveal of her true identity, and the heroic takedown of an unruly passenger. It painted Brenda Jenkins by name as a power-tripping villain, and the anonymous Marshal as a quiet, badass hero. The post ended with a tantalizing question: does Global American have a systemic problem with crew members abusing their authority? Within an hour, the post had been shared 10,000 times. By evening, the hashtag #DangerFlight1128 was trending on Twitter. By Saturday morning, it was a full-blown media inferno. Brenda Jenkins was no longer just an unemployed flight attendant. She was a public spectacle. Memes spread like wildfire, her face photoshopped onto the body of a tyrannical queen, a can of ginger ale held up like a holy grail with the caption, "The Soda of Justice." People who had never flown Global American, who had never met Brenda, weighed in with gleeful, vicious condemnation. She became an avatar for every bad customer service experience anyone had ever had. Her Facebook profile was discovered, and screenshots of her old vacation photos were posted with cruel commentary. Her address, culled from public records, was shared on fringe message boards. At Global American headquarters, Thomas Egan's PR department was in full-blown meltdown mode. "This is the nightmare scenario we discussed," he yelled during another emergency call with Catherine Riley. "She's not just an ex-employee anymore, she's a meme." "How do we fight a meme?" Catherine Riley's voice was as ever glacially calm. "We don't. We let the mob have its meal. We stick to the plan. We are shocked and appalled by the behavior of this former employee. We have taken swift and decisive action. We are implementing new training. We are cooperating fully with the FAA. We are the good guys here. We let Brenda Jenkins hang." Brenda, isolated in her suburban Chicago home, experienced the unraveling in real time. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications of hateful comments. News vans camped out on her street. Her former colleagues and friends suddenly stopped answering her calls, terrified of being tainted by association. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. Her savings were dwindling, and the prospect of finding another job seemed impossible. She was drowning, and in her desperation, she reached for a poisoned lifeline. His name was Leo Vance, a lawyer whose face was plastered on late-night TV ads and city buses. He specialized in wrongful termination and public defamation, a legal bottom feeder with bleached teeth and an insatiable appetite for media attention. Brenda, watching him on TV one night, saw him not as a shark, but as a savior. In his office, which smelled of leather and cheap cologne, Leo listened to Brenda's tearful, self-pitying version of events. He saw not a complex case, but a golden opportunity. "Brenda, listen to me," he said, leaning forward, his voice oozing sincerity. "You're a victim here. A 22-year veteran of a thankless job thrown to the wolves by a cowardly corporation to appease the online mob. They didn't fire you for cause. They fired you for bad PR. And this Marshal, this secret agent, she entrapped you. She had a duty to identify herself, and she didn't. We're not just going to sue. We're going to control the narrative. We're going to put you on national television." He sold her a fantasy where she would emerge as a sympathetic, hard-working woman wronged by the system. Blinded by desperation and flattered by the idea that someone was finally on her side, Brenda agreed to everything. It was the single worst decision of her life. A week later, she was sitting opposite Donovan Price, the host of the nation's most-watched cable news interview show, The Crucible. Price had built a career on dismantling his guests with a folksy charm that masked a prosecutorial mind. As the studio lights blazed, Brenda could feel her rehearsed confidence, carefully constructed by Leo, beginning to evaporate. Brenda Jenkins Donovan began his face a picture of empathy. America has heard only one side of this story. In your own words, tell us what happened on that flight. Brenda launched into a coached speech. "Donovan, first, I want to say how much I regret any misunderstanding. I have dedicated my life to passenger safety and comfort. I was having a difficult day, and I was simply trying to follow company policy." Donovan let her talk for a minute before he gently interrupted. "I understand. Policy is important, but our sources, who have seen the internal investigation documents, say that policy was quite flexible for you. Can you tell us about the passenger in seat 2A to whom you gave a complimentary double whiskey just minutes before this incident?" Brenda froze. It was a direct hit. I don't recall the specifics of every passenger." "Let me help you," Donovan said, looking down at his notes. "According to the service logs, you gave him the drink for service recovery. But you denied a sick-feeling passenger a simple can of soda for inventory purposes. To many people, Brenda, that looks less like policy and more like prejudice. Can you see why they might think that, no, it's not like that?" She said, her voice rising in panic. She looked off camera at Leo Vance, who was making a frantic, calm-down gesture. "I am not a racist. I have friends of all backgrounds. This is a character assassination. Donovan Price leaned forward, his folksy mask slipping to reveal the predator beneath. "Then let's talk about character. When this federal air marshal, this woman you had just belittled, revealed herself in order to stop a physical assault by another passenger, you hesitated. You questioned her authority. Is that the character of a 22-year veteran dedicated to safety?" she yelled at me. "She never told me who she was." Brenda cried, the rehearsed narrative completely collapsing. If I had known she was a person of such importance, of course, I would have treated her differently. I would have given her anything she wanted. The words hung in the air. In the control room, the show's producer whispered, "That's it. That's the soundbite." Donovan Price paused, letting the silence amplify the catastrophic admission. "So there it is," he said quietly, looking directly into the camera. The Brenda Jenkins doctrine. Respect isn't for everyone. It isn't for the graduate student, the teacher, the regular person in coach. It's a commodity to be dispensed only to people you deem of importance. Is that the kind of service Global American wants to be known for? The interview was an extinction-level event for Brenda's reputation. The clip went more viral than the original story. The phrase "person of such importance" became a national punchline. Undeterred, or perhaps just desperate for his payday, Leo Vance filed the lawsuit the next day, Brenda Jenkins versus Global American Airlines, citing wrongful termination, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. When the filing arrived at the offices of Sterling, Hewitt and Finch, it wasn't met with concern, but with celebration. Catherine Riley read it with a predatory smile. "He actually did it," she said to a junior associate. "He put it all in writing, and he attached the TV interview transcript as an exhibit to prove her emotional distress." "Get Frank Miller on the phone. We're filing a motion to dismiss with prejudice and petitioning for legal fees." The legal battle was brutally short. Catherine Riley's motion to dismiss was a legal masterpiece. It systematically dismantled every claim Brenda made using the airline's meticulous internal investigation, the sworn statements from crew and passengers, and most lethally, Brenda's own words from the Donovan Price interview. The judge, a no-nonsense senior jurist named Judge Annabelle Cortez, was not amused. Her ruling was scathing. "Plaintiff's claim that she was wrongfully terminated is wholly without merit," she wrote. "The evidence provided by the defendant shows clear cause rooted in the plaintiff's own admitted misconduct. Her claim of defamation is equally baseless, as the core of the public narrative appears to be factually accurate, a truth the plaintiff herself confirmed in a nationally televised interview. To file such a frivolous lawsuit is an abuse of the judicial process." She dismissed the case with prejudice, ensuring it could never be brought again. And in the final crushing blow, she granted Global American's motion ordering Brenda Jenkins to pay the entirety of the airline's considerable legal fees for having to defend against the frivolous suit. The unraveling was complete. Brenda was now not only unemployed, infamous, and unemployable, but she was also financially obliterated, indebted to the very corporation she had tried to sue. Her misguided attempt to fight back had become the final, self-inflicted act in her own destruction. The hard karma had not just knocked on her door. It had kicked it down, seized all her assets, and left her in the ruins of a life she had single-handedly demolished. In the wake of the storm, a new kind of quiet settled the quiet of consequences, taking root of lessons learned and of lives permanently altered. The story of Flight 1128 did not simply fade away. It became a catalyst forcing lasting change in the cold corporate ecosystem of Global American Airlines and in the lives of everyone involved. For the airline, Brenda Jenkins's spectacular self-immolation on national television was, as Catherine Riley had predicted, the final act they needed. It allowed them to position themselves not as the source of the problem, but as its primary victim and ultimate rectifier. Under the relentless guidance of Thomas Egan's PR team and the rigid oversight of Cynthia Davies, the Service with Respect initiative was rolled out with the speed and budget of a military campaign. It wasn't just a new training manual. It was a complete cultural overhaul. The core of the program was a case study simply titled The Ginger Ale Incident. It was an anonymized but brutally honest account of Flight 1128, highlighting Brenda's initial microaggression, her escalation, her failure during the security threat, and her subsequent termination. Flight attendants were drilled on new core tenets, the dignity default, a principle stating that every passenger is to be treated as a person of importance from the first point of contact. De-escalate, don't dominate, which used Brenda's confrontational style as a prime example of what not to do, and conscious inclusivity, a module specifically designed to combat the kind of unconscious bias that led Brenda to judge Serena by her sweatshirt. 6 months after its implementation, Cynthia Davies reviewed the quarterly metrics. Passenger complaints related to crew attitude were down 40%. The investment in decency was actually yielding a financial return. The ripples of consequence also found their way to the other players. Kyle Reed, the belligerent bachelor party-goer, stood before a federal judge who had seen a sharp increase in air rage cases. The judge decided to make an example of him. "Your selfish, drunken behavior did more than disturb a few passengers, Mr. Reed," the judge declared from the bench. "You created a security crisis that required the intervention of a federal air marshal. You put everyone on that aircraft at risk." His sentence: 6 months probation, a hefty fine, 200 hours of community service cleaning city parks, and a lifetime ban from Global American Airlines, was a humiliating and sobering end to his moment of drunken bravado. He lost his sales job due to the conviction, and the story became a permanent, embarrassing footnote to his name. For Brenda Jenkins, there was no recovery. The judge's order to pay Global American's legal fees was the final blow to her already precarious finances. The house she had been so proud of, bought with 2 decades of flight earnings, was sold in a short sale to cover the debt. Her notoriety clung to her like a shroud. She moved to a different state, hoping for anonymity, but in the age of the internet, her face was her prison. She eventually found a job as a night shift cashier at a sprawling 24-hour supermarket. The irony was suffocating. She, who had once held authority over hundreds of people in a pressurized cabin, now answered to a 19-year-old shift manager and spent her nights scanning groceries for tired, irritable customers. One evening, a woman pushed a rattling cart to her lane, talking loudly on her phone. "No, you don't understand," the woman said, her voice sharp with condescension. "I need you to spell it out for me. Some people just don't listen." Brenda flinched as if she'd been struck. Her hands trembled as she scanned the woman's items. She was invisible, a ghost in a blue smock, forced to listen to the echoes of her own past arrogance. Later on her break, she stood in the parking lot and watched a plane, its lights blinking in the dark sky, begin its descent. A wave of profound, bottomless loss washed over her. It wasn't just the job or the money. She had lost her status, her pride, her very sense of self. She had become one of the nameless, faceless people she used to look down upon. And what of Serena Washington, the quiet professional at the center of it all? She never sought recognition, and was relieved that her name was kept out of the public frenzy. Her reward was of a different, more meaningful kind. 2 months after the incident, her supervisor, Michael Henderson, called her into his Los Angeles field office. "Serena, I've just come from a debrief with the director," Henderson said, a rare, wide smile on his face. "Your commendation is a given. But there's more. Your report on Flight 1128 has become required reading at headquarters. Not the takedown part, they expect that from all of you. It's your assessment of the crew member, your restraint under verbal assault, your focus on professionalism over personal insult. It's being held up as the gold standard for operational mindset. He slid a packet across his desk. It was a set of orders. They're creating a new training block for recruits at FLETC. It's called Human Factor Threat Assessment. It's about recognizing when non-hostile personnel, crew, airport staff, even other law enforcement become a liability through bias, panic, or arrogance. They want you to help design the curriculum and lead the first sessions. 6 months later, Serena stood before a class of 30 new Air Marshal trainees at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in New Mexico. The faces looking back at her were young, eager, and radiated a nervous energy. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and steady. "Most of your training here will focus on external threats. Today we're going to talk about internal vulnerabilities. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and sometimes that link is wearing a friendly uniform." She clicked a button, and an anonymized diagram of the Flight 1128 cabin appeared on the screen behind her. "In this incident," she explained, "a physical threat, which we'll call the catalyst, was contained in under 2 seconds. But the incident itself was made possible and was dangerously escalated by a crew member, the antagonist. The antagonist's failure wasn't one of malice, but of character. It began with a small act of disrespect, a refusal to grant a passenger basic dignity. That small act created a volatile environment that the catalyst then exploited. Your job isn't just to be a warrior, it's to be a psychologist, a de-escalator, and a guardian of the entire human environment on that plane. You must understand that sometimes the most dangerous weapon on an aircraft is a bruised ego." Her words, born from her own humiliating experience, landed with profound weight. She had transformed her personal trial into a vital lesson for the next generation of protectors. A year after the infamous flight, Serena was on another routine trip, this time from Atlanta to Dallas. She was in seat 18C, reading a book, A Ghost, in a plain grey hoodie. A young flight attendant with a bright, genuine smile approached her. "Hi there," he said cheerfully. "Can I get you something to drink today?" "A ginger ale, please," Serena replied. "You bet," he said. As he reached for the can, she added, "You know, if it's not too much trouble, I'd love the whole can. Feeling a little bit of turbulence in my stomach today." The flight attendant didn't blink. He smiled wider. "That is absolutely not a problem. We want you comfortable. Coming right up." A moment later, he placed a full, unopened can of ginger ale and an empty cup on her tray table. It was a simple gesture, a tiny transaction in a day filled with thousands. But for Serena, it was everything. It was the evidence of a lesson, learned of a system corrected. It was the quiet, satisfying echo of her own professionalism. She popped the top, the familiar fizz, a small note of victory in the drone of the engines. She took a sip, leaned her head back, and closed her eyes, a silent guardian in a safer, more respectful sky. And there you have it, a story that started with a simple can of soda and escalated into a career-ending, life-altering event. It's a powerful reminder that the person you dismiss might be the one person you can't afford to disrespect. Brenda Jenkins's arrogance and prejudice cost her everything, not because of one mistake, but a lifetime of them culminating in a single catastrophic encounter. Serena Washington's quiet professionalism, on the other hand, not only saved the day, but also triggered positive systemic change within a massive corporation. What do you think was Brenda's fate deserved? Was this the ultimate case of workplace karma? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If stories like this, where arrogance meets accountability, fascinate you, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true-life dramas. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a story.